Hello, I'm Sue. Welcome to Fireside Chat. I would like to welcome you. We're just going to relax and have a bit of a discussion. I'd like to talk about there's a website called Democracy Docket. And the reason I found it is because this voting rights lawyer, his name is Mark Elias, he's incredibly good at what he does. And he produces and writes for this website. So it's really interesting because he's actively working as a lawyer to begin to fight back with some of the lawsuits that are already in courts to try to subvert this election. So I thought I would just read. There's like this article, and it's called "These Right-Wing Groups Are Trying to Remove Millions of Voters Around the Country." So it was written by Matt Cohen, and it was written on August 2024. In June, a nascent right-wing group in Nevada sent more than 1,000 names to 10 county clerks and registrars in an attempt to get them purged from the state's voter registration. There's similar efforts underway in Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, and dozens of other states. Since the 2020 election, when former President Donald Trump and his network of conservative sycophants pushed dangerous and false allegations of voter fraud and other election conspiracy theories, in other words, lies, his most loyal supporters, there's not that many of them now, are now trying to challenge millions of registered voters before the November election. The effort has evolved into a cottage industry of self-styled election integrity groups recruiting small armies of volunteers to try and identify registered voters that they believe should be removed from state and local voter rolls. It's hard to fully grasp the scale of this effort. The ecosystem is composed of smaller, hyper-local grassroots groups like the Pigpen Project in Nevada and North of 29 in Wisconsin, along with bigger groups like the Cleta Mitchell-backed Election Integrity Network, EIN, True the Vote, and United Sovereign Americans that are coordinating multi-state efforts to challenge voters. At the heart of the issue is how these groups are obtaining voter registration data to initiate these mass challenges. True the Vote and EIN have even developed their own software, IV3 and Eagle AI respectively, that use incomplete or flawed voter registration data, resulting in dozens of mass voter challenges of lawfully registered voters' registration status. But the recent rise of mass voter challenges is creating a massive strain for county clerks, registrars, secretaries of state, and other election officials who are tasked with maintaining clean voter rolls. There is legal procedure in place to challenge the residency and eligibility of a voter. These third-party efforts to remove voters do not follow those procedures, and it's important for voters to know that we follow the law. Bethany Drysdale, a spokesperson for Washoe County, Nevada, Office of the County Manager, recently told Democracy Docket in an emailed statement, quote, "It is a voter's responsibility to update their registration by notifying our office, and without their consent, there are extensive steps defined by statute that must be taken before we can make any changes that would affect their ability to vote, end quote. Despite the barrage of right-wing misinformation, disinformation, and legal challenges, let's just call them lies, in the past 4 years that cumulatively push a false narrative that most states' voter rolls are inaccurate. They are not. The truth is the opposite. States generally maintain very accurate voter rolls, and the regular processes in place to shed inactive or ineligible voters are working just as they should. Quote, election officials already have processes in place to make sure their voter roll lists are accurate, end quote. Lizzie Ulmer, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Communications at the state's United Democracy Center, said to Democracy Docket in an email. Quote, these anti-democracy groups are abusing the system and wasting time and resources of local officials, all based on unreliable data and election lies. This isn't the first time we've seen bad actors try to undermine our elections. These mass challenges are part of the anti-democracy playbook, end quote. Democracy Docket identified 8 groups leading the right-wing effort to challenge the registrations of millions of voters across the country. It's the only way they think they can win, because they can't win if they were to tell the truth. It's important to note that the activities of these groups don't account for the entirety of the mass voter challenge effort. Each state has their own statutes that outline who exactly can challenge voter registrations. And some states, like Georgia, have made it easier for regular citizens to challenge voter registrations on a mass scale. The Election Integrity Network was founded in 2021 by former Trump lawyer Cleta Mitchell. EIN is one of the largest groups leading the voter challenge efforts. EIN initially started as a large-scale, well-funded effort to recruit thousands of election workers and poll watchers in the 2022 midterm election. It's since expanded these efforts to foster a coalition of different state groups to engage in advocating various anti-democracy measures at the local level. Last year, EIN-affiliated activists launched Eagle AI, an incomplete and flawed database of voter roll records, and local EIN groups have been using the software to bring about voter registration challenges in various swing states. Of course they are. They should be completely put out of business because nothing that they're doing is true. States active are Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, Texas. Yeah, stay out of Michigan. True the Vote. Though the Texas-based True the Vote's anti-voting efforts date way back to 2011, the group is behind the IV3 software that features inaccurate voter registration data being used to challenge voter rolls across the country. This should be against the law. Ahead of the 2021 U.S. Senate runoffs in Georgia, the group was behind a mass effort to cancel 360,000 voter registrations. Recently, True the Vote is flooding Texas election officials with voter registration challenges. True the Vote, through its IV3 software, is assisting with voter challenge efforts in at least California, New York, and Washington, according to Documented. The People's Audit. The People's Audit was originally founded in 2020 in Florida to analyze the state's voter rolls, according to Documented, but it's since expanded its efforts. The group says they're engaged in efforts in Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas to analyze and challenge voter roll registrations. In May, failed Nevada Republican U.S. Senate candidate Jeff Gunter, announced a partnership with the People's Audit to, quote, clean up the voter rolls, unquote, in the state. United Sovereign Americans. United Sovereign Americans was formed in 2024 by Marley Hornick, a white right-wing activist that also started the New York Citizens Audit in 2022, a self-described nonpartisan group of citizens dedicated to restoring and maintaining the essential founding American principle of sovereignty through honest, provable elections in New York and across the nation. USA has been both recruiting and training volunteers across the country to look up and challenge voter roll registrations in their community, but their main effort has been filing a pair of lawsuits targeting voter roll maintenance and accuracy in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Pigpen Project, formed in 2023 by conservative activist Chuck Muth to, quote, clean up, unquote, Nevada's voter registration rolls. The Pigpen Project has been recruiting volunteers to identify and submit names to county election officials to be removed from voter rolls. According to the New York Times, the group is working with EIN, True the Vote, and Vote Ref, another unreliable database of semi-public voter information, to identify voters. By Muth's own admission, the group is also engaging in boots on the ground to canvass door-to-door in the Silver State to confirm voter registrations. North of 29. Another group recruiting volunteers for a door-to-door canvassing effort is the Wisconsin-based North of 29. The group, formed in 2020 by Stephanie Forer Harbridge, according to The Guardian, is canvassing at least 72 counties in Wisconsin with the help of noted election denier Mike Lindell. Souls to the Roll is the name of the effort by Michigan Fair Elections, the state's EIN affiliate, to challenge voter registrations throughout the state. The group is recruiting and training volunteers to use another notoriously unreliable database, Check My Vote, to identify potential voters to report to election officials. Iowa canvassing. In 2022 and 2023, Iowa canvassing challenged nearly 1,000 voter registrations in Lynn and Black Hawk counties, resulting in more than 500 registration cancellations. The group formed sometime after the 2020 election, according to local reporting, as a grassroots group of volunteers keeping Iowa voter rolls clean. Give me a break, for fair and trusted elections. It was fair and trusted before all these people came on the scene, and uses a mix of data research, door-to-door canvassing, so please don't answer your door, and volunteering at the polls to identify voter registrations to challenge. So they have free like digital newsletters, and so you could read whatever you'd like to. There's different stories. This one's called Republicans Are Losing the Vote by Mail Battle in Court by Courtney Cohn, September 16, 2024. Former President Donald Trump and his fellow Republicans have switched their positions on mail-in voting so many times that it would give any voter whiplash, whether they claim to support it as a valid voting method or disparage it as a vehicle for election fraud. The GOP lawsuits don't lie. The Republican Party is staunchly anti-mail voting. The Republican National Committee, along with GOP figures at the state level, have filed continuous lawsuits challenging states' mail-in voting policies, trying to make it harder for voters to return their absentee ballots, and rejecting large numbers of votes. How is that even legal? Despite this clear push to pursue cases on this issue, Republicans are losing the vote by mail battle in courts across the country. Some of these mail-in voting lawsuits were filed by national and or state Republicans targeting states' pro-voting policies, and others were brought by Democrats challenging GOP voter suppression laws. Why do we even have voter suppression laws is what I want to know. Democracy Docket has been tracking GOP mail-in voting cases during the 2024 election cycle, and according to our data, Republicans have won 5 cases and lost 20. Some of these mail-in voting lawsuits were filed by national and or state Republicans targeting states' pro-voting policies, and others were brought by Democrats challenging GOP voter suppression laws. We categorize them as wins and losses based on the court's actions. A GOP win is Republicans win their case or Democrats lose their case. A GOP loss is where Republicans lose their case or Democrats win their case. The victories and losses are not just for cases that have already been decided and have officially concluded. They account for any victory or loss a court delivers in a case. In one case, Stefanik versus Hochul, Republicans have been handed 3 losses by courts. Last fall, the RNC and other Republican groups challenged the New York Early Mail Voter Act. The law, signed in September of 2023 by New York Governor Kathy Hochul, allows all registered voters to vote by mail during the early voting period. Previously in the state, voters had to provide an excuse as to why they had to vote by mail. Honestly, every state should have no excuse, that there's no excuse necessary whatsoever to vote by mail or to vote absentee. There should be no excuse necessary. In their lawsuit, the Republicans argued the New York Constitution enumerates 2 classes of voters who can vote using absentee ballots: those who are out of town on Election Day and those who have an illness or physical disability, and the new law applies to voters outside of those 2 groups. The GOP plaintiffs lost in a trial court, an appellate court, and ultimately the state's highest court, the New York Court of Appeals, which upheld the law on August 20, rejecting the Republican challenge. In another notable mail-in voting case, Republicans received both a win and a loss. In Genser versus Butler County Board of Elections, 2 voters in Butler County, Pennsylvania, sued the Butler County Board of Elections on April 29 for its decision to reject their provisional ballots after they originally submitted mail-in ballots without an inner secrecy envelope known as naked ballots. I brought in an absentee ballot a few weeks ago, and there was a secrecy sleeve. It was kind of like this manila color, and you have to put your ballot in the secrecy sleeve and then put it in your envelope before mailing it in. The voters argued the election board violated state election law by denying them the opportunity to cure or correct their invalid mail-in ballots. Now, that's true. They should have had the opportunity to correct their invalid ballots. The Pennsylvania Democratic Party intervened in the case on behalf of the voters, and the RNC and state GOP intervened on behalf of the county election board. On August 16, a court ruled in favor of the defendants and dismissed the case, prompting the plaintiffs to appeal to the Commonwealth Court. This was a win for the GOP. Then, on September 5, the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court reversed the trial court's ruling, meaning Butler County voters will be able to cast a provisional ballot at their polling place if their mail-in ballot is missing an inner secrecy envelope. This was a loss for the GOP. The Republican plaintiffs appealed the Commonwealth Court's ruling to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on September 8. With less than 2 months until the 2024 election, Republicans have only increased the number of anti-voting lawsuits they're filing in swing states. including ones continuing to target mail-in and absentee voting. On Thursday, the RNC and Michigan GOP sued Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson over what they allege is incomplete guidance from her office on how election clerks should verify absentee ballots. I know she's ready for these ridiculous lawsuits, so I'm very glad that Jocelyn Benson is taking care of us in our Michigan elections. If they continue to lose most of their mail-in voting cases as they have this cycle, then voters casting mail-in ballots won't face additional barriers to voting. We shouldn't. However, there's still plenty of time for courts to issue decisions leading up to November, so voters must wait and see how the remaining cases unfold. It's really unbelievable. It really is. It is unbelievable. So let's see if there's something else that looks interesting. Autocrats are hiding behind the robes of justice. This is by Kathy Albisa on August 23, 2024. The Supreme Court is simultaneously the least democratic institution of our three branches of government and the final bulwark tasked with protecting our democracy. They're doing a terrible job. It plays a deeply contradictory and essential role, which depends on maintaining an increasingly fragile legitimacy. The storm of decisions that have come down from the Supreme Court this term has ripped the thin veneer of objectivity or nonpartisanship that protects that fragile legitimacy, and it has created a crisis for the Supreme Court and the country. The court has encouraged excessive court interference and litigious bottlenecks to governing that undermines independent public administration. It has created blanket presidential immunity for any and all criminal actions that arguably were taken as part of the president's constitutionally prescribed role. And the Supreme Court has shattered basic rights, allowing criminalization of poverty and lack of housing with the stunning fiction that our homelessness crisis was not clearly involuntary. Through the cumulative effect of this term's decisions, the court has affirmed an anti-democratic framework for authoritarians that will undermine freedom, erase even the pretense of equality, and spur state-sanctioned abuse of the American people. Our democracy has always been imperfect, founded on racial, class, and gender hierarchy. But it offers foundational ideals that allowed people's movements to fight for the promise of an ever-perfect union. This legal attack against democracy challenges those basic ideals and is driven by a highly racialized backlash that includes calls for massive deportation, increased criminalization, except that it's against the wrong people, intensifying voter suppression, and even efforts to ban conversation about racial equity. Racism is not the only elephant in the room. It is the elephant trampling democracy. Our country has faced critical crises in the past in moments of great injustice. In those moments, the Supreme Court has always played a key role, sometimes as a hindrance and sometimes as a champion for justice. During the New Deal era, when grave economic suffering blanketed the country after a period of great wealth concentration, not unlike today, the Supreme Court initially blocked essential legislation to help the country course correct. Our stark choice at this moment is between maintaining this illegitimate Supreme Court and preserving our democratic traditions. As FDR was working to increase the number of justices on the court, Justice Owen Roberts shifted his vote to allow the New Deal to go forward. This is known in law schools across the country as the switch in time that saved 9. President Joe Biden is echoing history with his proposal for 18-year term limits, reversing the current stance on presidential immunity and creating a reasonable binding code of ethics. We so need this. Even if this crisis is temporarily abated by shifting opinions on the Supreme Court, all aspects of Biden's proposal would make our government more democratic and accountable, and maybe honest. Given that the Supreme Court is no longer the defender of democracy, our stark choice at this moment is between maintaining this illegitimate Supreme Court and preserving our democratic traditions. We have no choice in this country, as a country, but to meet the moment and take required bold action to ensure our institutions meet the mandate they were given. In terms of basic rights, democracy, equity, and justice, we need these serious reforms and interrogation of our current Supreme Court. So I'm just giving you an idea of some of the articles that they have written in the past and just kind of like seeing what they're kind of talking about right now. Let's see if they have any interesting cases. So we're going to have a look here. And I have, let's see, the Michigan absentee ballot number matching guidance challenge. So this was written, it's a lawsuit filed by the Republican National Committee, Michigan Republican Party, and a local town clerk against the Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and Director of Elections, Jonathan Brader, challenging the Secretary's recent guidance regarding Michigan's number matching policy for absentee ballots. And this was filed on September 18, 2024. Lawsuit filed by the RNC, Michigan Republican Party, and a local town clerk against Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Michigan Director of Elections Jonathan Brader, challenging the Secretary's recent guidance regarding Michigan's number matching policy for absentee ballots. In Michigan, absentee ballots must include a numbered and perforated stub that ensures the correct voter is casting their ballot. In February 2024, the Secretary issued guidance instructing local election officials to process absentee ballots that were missing or including the wrong numbered stub as challenged rather than wholly rejecting the ballot. I think that's right. In April, the Secretary released a second set of instructions telling local officials to reject ballots with a missing stub and to contact the local county clerk for instruction if a ballot includes the wrong numbered stub. The plaintiffs also take issue with the fact that a separate portion of the April guidance allows clerks to mark mismatched ballots as challenged rather than rejected. The plaintiffs claim that the guidance violates the Michigan Constitution and Michigan election law and ask the court to order the Secretary to issue new guidance requiring local officials to reject all absentee ballots. I don't agree with that at all. With a missing or wrong numbered stub. They asked the court to issue a decision before Michigan begins processing. How did sorry, the aliens don't factor into this. The Republican plaintiffs filed their complaint on September 18, 2024. The state defendants have not responded yet. So this is interesting. Rethinking absentee voting, why no excuse should be needed. This is by Courtney Cohn, written on August 13, 2024. Quote, I can't tell you the number of people who I've talked to over the years who meant to go to the polls, said Kate Pringle, an attorney representing Leadership Now, a pro-voting group in New York and Washington, D.C. She explained that people have said to her, quote, I meant to go to the polls, but I got stuck at work or I meant to go, but my kid got sick, end quote. Pringle, who lives in New York, a state that recently had its law allowing for no excuse mail-in voting challenged in court, said she's not sure if her kids will be in town on Election Day. My boys are heading off to college. They might be home around the time of the election. They might not. They're not sure what their schedule is going to be, what it's going to look like, Pringle said. If they needed to provide an excuse to vote by mail, like explaining that they would be out of the district on Election Day, that would be hard, Pringle said. However, under the state's Early Mail Voter Act, which was upheld by New York's highest court on August 20, Pringle's sons can vote early using a mail-in ballot without providing an excuse. That's awesome. They don't have to worry about whether they're actually going to be out of the district or not. They can simply say, this is the most convenient way for me to vote. I was thinking about that too, because, 4 years ago, there were lineups of people who were waiting out in lines for 8 hours or 12 hours to vote in person. And none of that would be necessary if they could have no excuse absentee ballot voting, because became even wrong to give them water or a snack. And I've heard that that has been reversed. So that's good. But yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like that people have to wait in line for hours. And probably, minority districts and minority areas probably have long wait times because the other side has gotten rid of drop boxes. They've gotten rid of some machines and all these kinds of things that Louis DeJoy did 4 years ago, and I can't believe he's still in office. That's wrong right there. So the question of whether people should need an excuse to vote by mail, no. The majority of states and voters also say no. You can't give a waiting voter crystal. No, you can now. I know that there was one state for sure that they reversed that decision on that you can't provide them a beverage. So I guess Crystal Light would qualify as a beverage. Currently, 36 states allow people to vote by mail without providing an excuse as to why they can't vote in person on Election Day. There are 14 states that require someone to provide an excuse. I wonder if they're red or blue, to utilize absentee voting. The types of excuses vary, but include being out of the state or country on Election Day, having an illness or disability, being over 65 years old, having to work a shift during all voting hours, and being an election poll worker. That's ironic that if you have to work at the polls, you can't vote. That's crazy. The states on this list are primarily Republican-led. Big surprise. Like Alabama and Texas. But you know what? Some of these Republican-led states are in play in 2024, which is fascinating. But there are also outliers, such as Connecticut, with these policies. Connecticut voters can say yes or no in November. Connecticut's Democratic-controlled House and Senate approved an amendment in May that would authorize the legislature to pass a law allowing for no-excuse absentee voting. If approved by voters, this would give lawmakers the green light to pass this legislation. Under state law now, a voter can only cast an absentee ballot if they can prove they will be out of town on Election Day. That's insane. Or if illness, physical disabilities, active service in the military, religious beliefs, or duties as an election official prevent them from going to their polling place. Why wouldn't they just work in their own polling place? If the majority of voters approve the amendment of a ballot initiative this November, the state's absentee voting policy could fundamentally change. As we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, absentee voting works. It was proven to be a safe and effective way to cast your vote, says State Rep. Amy Berger Gervalo in a statement. David McGuire, ACLU of Connecticut Rise PAC chairperson, said, if approved, this initiative would benefit numerous groups of people, including working parents, voters of color, people with disability, and elderly voters. I was thinking, too, that Election day, like, why isn't a national holiday? Like, I really want to know why we can't just make it a holiday for everyone. I really want to know, like, what good reason is there to not make it a national holiday? I'd love to know. Also, many people who don't have an approved excuse don't feel comfortable lying. It's crazy because who are the liars in this situation? Which he said no one wants to happen anyway, but the current way leaves many people without an option to vote. This isn't the first piece of election reform that state Democrats have pushed for in recent years. In 2022, lawmakers put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to authorize the state legislature to pass a law to implement in-person early voting, and voters approved it. As a result, in June 2023, Governor Ned Lamont signed a bill into law that established early in-person voting before elections in the state beginning on January 1. Bit by bit, Connecticut is pulling itself out of the dark ages of voting procedures and bringing us in line with the majority of other American states, said State Senator May Flexer, chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. More voting equals better democracy, period. McGuire said the reason it has taken so long for Connecticut, a Democratic state, to have more voting options is the nature of the state constitution. Connecticut is somewhat unique in that we have a state constitution. Okay. Is Ned sure? Oh my God. Ned, I'm not sure if it's short for Nedley, but it's not a very common name anymore. Nedley, gosh, can you imagine having that name? We did not have any early voting before now, and this will actually be the first general election with early voting here in Connecticut. He said people often, and this is Ned, often assume because Connecticut has a blue trifecta, democratically controlled House and Senate and Democratic governor, that the state is progressive and has fair voting policies. However, that's not always the case. In reality, there are so many laws and policies that are inequitable that do disadvantage folks who have historically been discriminated against or held back from voting. He said that's why it's so important that this ballot initiative passes in November. Good luck, Connecticut. We got you, man. We are cheering for you in Connecticut to have better voting laws. New York's highest court said yes. On September 20, 2023, New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed a package of voting rights laws, including the Early Mail Voter Act. The New York Constitution only allows people to cast mail-in ballots if they can provide certain excuses, such as a disability, illness, or absence from their county on Election Day. However, the Early Mail Voter Act creates a workaround to this that would not require constitutional change. That's a great idea. Instead of implementing a true absentee voting system, the Early Mail Voter Act law allows voters to cast a mail-in ballot without an excuse only during the pre-existing 9-day early voting period. Susan Lerner, executive director of Common Cause New York, explained this law is extremely important because with policies like this, you see a large uptick in the number of people who use vote by mail, and it often results in an increased turnout, which is positive, unless you're a Republican. She also noted that voters should have the right to choose their voting method, and if we trust them to pick our leaders, we should trust them to determine how they want to vote. Pringle said, in addition to the more talked about reasons why people can't or don't want to vote in person on Election Day, like unpredictable work shifts, long commutes, family obligations, and difficulty with transportation, some people are actually afraid to go to the polls. If you're known as a Democrat in a town that's largely Republican, you might be nervous about standing in a long poll line. You might be nervous that you would be targeted. And we know there are concerns. I know I love Pringles too. I love Pringles too. They're the best. I wish they had no calories. This is Pringle. Pringle has a lot of points, right? She has a lot of points. You might be nervous that you would be targeted. And we know there are concerns that political parties may target individuals based on their appearance or ethnic background, Lerner said. The same day that the Early Male Voter Act was signed, national and state level Republicans filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality, like they care about the Constitution, of the legislation. They argued the New York Constitution enumerates two classes of voters who can vote using absentee ballots: those who are out of town on election day and those who have an illness or physical disability, and the new law applies to voters outside of those two groups. They should apply to everyone. In February, a trial court judge rejected the GOP plaintiffs' arguments, finding they failed to meet their heavy burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the Early Male Voter Act is unconstitutional under the New York Constitution. After the plaintiffs appealed, of course they did, an appellate court similarly rejected the GOP's argument and wrote the new law does not violate Article 2 of the New York Constitution and was properly implemented through legislative enactment. Republicans then appealed to the state's highest court, the New York Court of Appeals, which upheld the law on August 20th, rejecting the GOP's challenge. U.S. House and Senate Democrats also support no-excuse mail-in voting. The Freedom to Vote Act, which was originally introduced by House and Senate Democrats in 2021 and was reintroduced in July 2023, is currently one of the most talked about pieces of voting rights legislation. It would protect voting rights in many ways, including establishing no-excuse mail-in voting for all voters in federal elections. Quote, the Freedom to Vote Act will set basic national standards to make sure all Americans can cast their ballots in the way that works best for them, regardless of what zip code they live in, unquote. Senator Amy Klobuchar said in a statement, quote, this bill will ensure Americans can request a mail-in ballot and have access to drop boxes, have at least 2 weeks of early voting, and can register to vote on election day, unquote. Both the House and Senate versions of the bill were stalled in committee shortly after they were introduced. Despite this, numerous Democrats running for office have made the passage of this bill one of their main priorities, including Texas Senate candidate Colin Allred, who might just beat Ted Cruz. He's actually leading right now, Ted Cruz. I'm so happy for Colin Allred. And Maryland Senate candidate Angela also Brooks. Courts across the country weigh in. Under Indiana law, a voter must have an accepted reason to vote absentee, and being over the age of 65 is one reason. In 2020, a pro-voting group and voters challenged the law, saying it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, as well as the 26th Amendment, by denying or abridging the right to vote of citizens who are 18 years of age or older on account of age. After a federal district court delivered them a loss, the plaintiffs appealed the case to the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which affirmed the lower court decision that upheld Indiana's restrictions on who can vote by mail in the state. There was a similar lawsuit filed in 2020 in Texas. Under Texas law, individuals are only eligible to vote by mail without a qualifying excuse, such as illness, if they are 65 years or older on election day. The Texas Democratic Party and voters challenged these provisions, also presenting the argument that this age-based exception violates the 26th Amendment. After years of litigation, a district court and the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed the case, and the plaintiffs asked the U.S. Supreme Court to weigh in. In April, the justices denied their petition, leaving the vote by mail restrictions in place. Also, last December, South Carolina voters challenged their state's absentee voting rules, which are similar to Indiana and Texas, arguing that the age-based rule violates the 14th and 26th Amendments. Litigation in this case is still ongoing in a federal district court, so these voters will have to see how the court will rule. What happens next? Leading up to the 2024 election, Republicans and right-wing groups across the country continue to file lawsuits challenging states' absentee voting laws and claiming that mail-in voting causes election fraud. It's absolutely not true, including in Mississippi, Nevada, and Wisconsin. And so, you know what? Those states might just, you never know, they could flip blue. We've seen voting access and requirements around voting becomes hyper-politicized, when in reality, this should be a nonpartisan issue, McGuire said. There's a lot of disinformation put out there. However, he said that there is still hope to continue to push for no-excuse absentee voting across the country. It's unlikely any state's policies will be changed before the 2024 election, but the ballot initiative, federal legislation, and court cases could create positive change for future elections. Quote, "There's definitely been a huge enthusiasm in the question around voting and the power of voting, and people realizing that in order to be a truly free society where everybody's rights are respected, you need to make it easy for people to vote," unquote, McGuire said. This story was updated on August 20, 2024, to add that the New York Court of Appeals upheld the state's Early Mail Voter Act on August 20, rejecting the GOP's challenge. So it's very interesting that we've had, I guess, a couple of years to put in place for this election safeguards and guardrails and voting rights laws, and we can only operate under the laws that exist at the time of the election. I think one of the first things Kamala Harris will do if she is elected president is she will sign into law the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would make it easier for all people in the country to vote, not just Republicans or Democrats. That's the thing, you know, Democrats put into action, put into law legislation that benefits everyone. So it isn't just they're protecting the Medicare of Democrats, they're also protecting the Medicare of Republicans. And it kills me that Republicans who are worried about losing their Social Security or their Medicare or Medicaid, how they can vote for a party which seeks to steal money, which isn't even theirs. We have paid into our own Social Security, and we have worked in order to have Medicare entitlements. And so it's not like a budget where the money is there from the government or from taxes. It's actually money that we've had to earn ourselves, and that it is put towards our own individual Medicare and Social Security. So we have worked for that, and we have earned that, and it is absolutely not on the table for anyone to take it away from us. It's not an entitlement. It's something that's earned, that's ours. But Republicans want to try to take money from the poor and just to give more money to the rich. And I just don't understand how they can sleep at night, how they can look in the mirror, because billionaires don't need more tax cuts. And it's just really wrong. There's so many things in this country that are not right, just are not right. And I really wish that maybe in the next 4 years that we can, if we have all three levels of government, if we have the House and the Senate and the White House, that we could put into practice rules and laws that actually benefit everyone and protect everyone's health care, protect everyone's Social Security. You know, when Biden had checks during the pandemic, it wasn't just for Republicans or just for Democrats. It was for everyone. So if someone is criticizing something that Biden has made possible, it's not like they're going to refuse that check. I'm sure that people who were making it very difficult during that pandemic because of their actions and their beliefs, I'm sure that they did not rip up the check. I'm sure they went and cashed it and used the money while criticizing Democratic government, even though Democratic government made things possible for them that they wouldn't have had if it was any other party in power. It just kills me, you know, like, why would you vote against your own interests? Like, why would Republican women be okay with their own daughters not having rights to their own bodies? I don't understand that. That's ridiculous. So I really hope that that this is it's going to be a free and fair election. I know that we have Mark Elias fighting for us and keeping elections fair. And our Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is ready to take on any challenges to our free and fair elections. And because we're a swing state, you know, it's really important that we protect our own right to vote and that we feel comfortable and free to go to the polls and show our identification and cast a vote legally and with every reason. You know, you have every reason to do that. That's your right. And so as a citizen of the U.S., I really feel like this is such a great country. We have so much that's good about us. So we have to absolutely vote like there is no tomorrow, because there won't be a tomorrow if Republicans win. So please make an effort and take your neighbors, take your family members, ask everyone you know, how are you getting to the polls, or do you have an absentee ballot? Because we really need to continue our blue tsunami in all three branches of government, all three levels, because we need the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so, you know, listen to candidates, listen to the debate, and think for yourself. You know, when you go into that voting booth, your husband isn't going to be there with you. Your boyfriend is not going to be there with you. Your vote is private. And so if they are Trump supporters, you know what, let them be, but that doesn't mean you have to support him. So anyway, I hope that everything is going well for everyone out there. So enjoy talking with you about things. It's very important that we get out there and vote like we have never voted before, because Democrats have to win all three legislative bodies. I am really grateful. This is a great country. I'm so grateful to have this show, to work with these incredible people at the studio. And I just want to be grateful and say thank you for this opportunity. And please take care of yourselves and make sure that you're safe going to the polls. If someone refuses you a poll, like if they say that your ballot isn't valid or whatever, you can say, I demand a provisional ballot, which is my right by law. And you can vote right there and then on election day at the polling place. Make sure you know that. And if there is any kind of election interference, that's illegal. So you have every right to go to vote and to be safe. And so please don't not go because you're worried. No, you know what? We have to stand up for our country. And if we don't now, we're going to lose it and there won't be any more voting. So please, please vote blue. And you know what? It will be a great country because we will have our rights enshrined in law. So I'll talk to you next time. Take good care of yourselves and figure out what you're going to do for voting, okay? Make a plan, take other people, talk to family members, drive them there, whatever you have to do. And it's going to be worth it. I promise you, it's going to be worth it. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.